Hello everyone, my name is Matt and this is part 2 of bringing the X-Men to the MCU. If you didn't catch the first part, you should probably stop watching and go click it in the link below, but otherwise, let's get on to the story.
Alright, this part deals with the creation and subsequent destruction of the friendship between Charles Xavier and Eric Maximoff. Now, I don't know exactly how Eric becomes Eric, like the name Eric. He's obviously adopted from the Maximoffs, but the first name change, I don't really understand how I would get that to work. I'm sure somebody on the internet, like, wow, it's not my hand, or they'd just be really smart and be able to figure it out. But for me, for now, I'm just going to keep going like his name is Eric, just to keep me sane, if that's cool. At this point, Charles is wheelchair bound and in college with his roommate Eric. Now, mutants have become even more commonplace, so much so that they're having ethics debates in college. You have mutant court cases, you have different sorts of things to kind of make it more of an academic issue as well as a current social climate issue. This part of the story is pretty much the same. They both fall on different ideological sides of the argument. Charles is more of the mutants should live in peace with humans, and Eric is more on the other side of why would humans have to be above mutants when mutants are obviously much more powerful. The mutants should be the alpha and then humans should be the beta in the situation of the planet. So at this point, Charles knows that Eric is a mutant because his powers have grown and expanded. He can now read minds, he can subtly influence people, he can do a lot more with his powers. Because he can read minds, he already knows that Eric is a mutant. However, he has not revealed his mutant status to Eric or anyone, mostly because as soon as someone finds out that you're a mutant, you have a lot of animosity. Now, if people found out you were a mutant that could control and read minds, your ability to have normal friendships are even harder to maintain. So Charles, a little selfishly, has been hiding that fact from everyone he knows, with the exception of his mother. Now, despite being on different sides of the argument ideologically, they are still best friends, Charles and Eric. They play chess together all the time, they hang out, they are very good friends, and they care about each other a great deal. The only thing that really puts a strain on their relationship is their third best friend, whose name is Moira. Is that right? Moira Kinross. Now see, both Charles and Eric are in love with Moira. They love her for everything that she's about. She's a beautiful woman, but she's also very powerful, very strong, very smart. She falls on both sides of their argument. She sees both sides, and she constantly is a little bit of a thorn in their relationship because both men care about her a great deal. One day, Eric, Charles, and Moira attend a mutant rights rally at their campus. And it is very positive. Everyone's there. The speakers talking about how mutant people, humans, and everybody in between can live together in peace and in harmony. And Charles is vibing with it. Moira's vibing with it. Eric's kind of just there because he's like, hey, yo, I'm trying to hang out with this girl. And also, he's best friend with Charles. Even though he doesn't agree with them, he's still there. And it is what it is for him. However, the peace doesn't last very long as a group of anti-mutant citizens come up with their own protest and storm the rally. Things become heated instantly. Insults are flying, people are screaming, and the whole situation becomes a powder keg. Well, sure enough, something is thrown, or something is said, or something is shot, and we don't know exactly what happens, but it erupts into chaos. People are running and fighting and screaming, and somehow, in the fray, Moira gets knocked down. She gets like a rock to the face, or a brick, or a bar, or something, and she gets knocked unconscious. Charles and Eric both rush to her side. Charles immediately starts to search her mind for her. But since Eric doesn't know that Charles is a mutant, he just thinks that he is in shock and in sadness. And Eric believes at this moment that Moira has died, that she died. Just because there's this blood everywhere and it triggers something in him. Eric has had enough. So he begins to do what he thinks is the only way to stop this sort of thing from happening. He begins to slaughter the anti-mutant activists. One by one, he starts taking them out. Steel beams, like bike chains, like think of a cool scene, like in my head, it's a cool scene of just like freaking You'd be like, ah, the blood coming. It's gonna be like epic. A lot of the shots you see from First Class where Magneto's just wrecking foods. Like that's what I'm going for. Eric is just showing up, taking people out. One of the exceptions of the anti-mutants that gets away is actually Kane Marco, who is a member of the anti-mutant mob. He manages to get away because he hides. One of the things you start to find in the story is that Kane is a coward. He is a coward, so he hides while the entire mob, anti-mob, is getting massacred. Charles manages to revive Moira from her unconsciousness, but when they look around, they see everybody is running and screaming. It is a chaotic event because Eric is just unleashing hell on anyone he deems unworthy at this point. And Charles decides that he has to take him down. So he uses his mental powers to shut down Eric. Eric, having no idea that Charles was a mutant, this came as a huge shock, and he feels betrayed and angry. And Charles uses his ability with great force to be able to shut Eric down. And one of the ways he does this is that he tricks Eric into thinking that in his rage, he killed Moira.
Eric
Eventually gets succumbed to Charles's telepathic attack and is knocked out. Eventually, S.H.I.E.L.D. comes and takes Eric away, and Charles and Moira go home. But this incident does nothing but fan the flames of mutant fear, mutant hatred, as video services of Eric just wrecking people on the news and things, and it just becomes a bigger talking point for people who are against the mutant kind.
Things go from bad to worse, as it is reported that Eric has escaped me. Things don't get any better for the mutant populace, as it appears that things go from bad to worse, as is reported.
Things go from bad to worse, as it is reported that Eric has escaped his prison at S.H.I.E.L.D., and his whereabouts are currently unknown. Charles wakes up in the middle of the night to find that his chessboard has been changed, and the Queen is now missing. Fearful of Moira's life, he rushes over to her house, only to find her home just fine. Rather than take any chances, Charles telepathically implants a suggestion into Moira's head that she should leave the Americas and go back to Ireland, where she's from. He does this without her consent or her knowledge, but he does so because he wants to keep her safe. This plays on the juxtaposition of Professor Charles Xavier's character. We see that Charles is not really above using his powers to get what he wants and to do what he thinks is right, which puts the focus less of a moral perfect person like some of the comics used to do back in the time, or the television show he did back in the 90s, but kind of shows that there is a little bit of a gray to his white knight costume. Fast forward a little more in time. The American people are sick and tired of politicians that let super criminals and freaks run amok, destroying the world. Hence, it's time to vote in an outsider, a entrepreneur, a businessman, not some politician that's gonna play by the rules of Congress in the game. Oh no, they want someone different. Someone like Norman Osborn to be president. And he does. This is one of the real reasons that it's so great that the X-Men are back in the MCU, is that we can weave in storylines from everything. At this point, it's been a few years, so now Spider-Man can be a more established character, and his villains can be more established as well. Norman Osborn, to the general public, is just an entrepreneur, CEO of Oscorp. But we, as the audience, know his true colors, and they are very often green. Norman Osborn becomes president of the United States, and he is heavily anti-mutant, citing menaces like the Hulk and Spider-Man as two huge destructive forces in the world today. The Daily Bugle, a New York news outlet, agrees with this stance, and it feeds on each other. The propaganda feeds into the president, who feeds into the propaganda that feeds into the president. Once again, we've never heard anything like this happen in real life. Now, we know that the Hulk and Spider-Man are not the same thing as a mutant, but the general population doesn't know the fine points of mutagenics, the X gene, all of that. So it's easy for news outlets like the Daily Bugle to kind of just switch things around and join in on the fear-mongering, which continues, and it creates even more legislation against mutants and people openly and aggressively being anti-mutant. At this point, Charles Xavier is an adult. He's a professor and is an established voice for the pro-mutant, for the mutant rights movement. He often speaks at rallies, he speaks online, he speaks in interviews about mutant rights and how peace can be achieved amongst humans and mutants. Oftentimes, his own mutant status gets called into question. People ask him, are you a mutant? Why are you so about it? And now either he avoids the question or he uses his powers to keep people from asking that question. So people in the world still don't know that Professor Charles Xavier is himself a powerful mutant. In fact, one of the most powerful mutants that there has ever been. While Charles is trying his best to bring about peace through conversation, it is clear that the tide of the general population is staunchly anti-mutant. Adding fuel to the anti-mutant fire and fear is a mysterious new group called the Brotherhood. Not much is known about the Brotherhood, but their presence is starting to make waves in the media, mostly on the internet and away from the mainstream outlets. But one of the things that's interesting is while they do mostly and mainly focus on anti-mutant groups destroying warehouses, disrupting rallies, killing key lead speakers of that group, some of the other groups that they target are other hate groups, ISIS, neo-Nazis, and then, starting in America, the KKK. The world media doesn't know how to respond to this, and they're trying to keep it under wraps, but the Brotherhood is slowly gaining more and more ink in the media. As their actions continue, it's getting harder and harder for the government to downplay the Brotherhood's existence, thus adding more fear and more confusion to the entire mutant rights debate. One day after a very disheartening conversation, like a debate about mutants' rights, where it doesn't necessarily go Charles's way, he is met outside by a young Native American man. This young Native American man introduces himself simply as Forge, and he explains that he has something terrible to tell Charles. Forge tells Xavier that while surfing the internet, he found that S.H.I.E.L.D., now run by Norman Osborn, has been tinkering around with leftover Hydra tracking equipment to use on mutants. Captain America Winter Soldier. He explains to Charles that after following him and his work, Forge thought he was the best one to bring this information to because he seems to be very passionate and very honest about him wanting to protect and help mutants. At first, Charles just tries to dismiss Forge as a fan who's bought into the more crazier stories that have been around the internet, when suddenly Forge's wristwatch starts beeping out of control. Forge then explains that he built a miniature mutant tracker into his watch, and he now knows that Professor Charles Xavier is himself a mutant. This makes him even more persistent to give Charles this information and begs him, no, demands that he help find a way to fix this. At first, Charles decides to go into Forge's mind to wipe his memory of this entire conversation and the fact that he's a mutant. But while he's inside Forge's brain, he realizes that what Forge is saying is true. S.H.I.E.L.D. is using old Hydra programming and tech to try to find a way to locate, target, and hunt down mutants. Charles has a change of heart. He realizes that the number one enemy of mutants right now is fear of them running around uncontrolled and unchecked. Xavier thinks that if he can find a way to teach mutants how to control and harness their powers like he learned when he was young, the government and the people would have less reason to be afraid because they wouldn't be just uncontrollable mutants running around blowing things up. Charles then recruits Forge to help him build his own mutant tracking device, a way for him to find mutants before the government does, so that he can help them learn how to control their powers and taking away the fear that is used to hunt, hurt, and defame them. They call the device Cerebro. And even though it's still not finished, it allows Charles to stretch his powers farther than he had ever done before. In so doing, Charles actually finds two young mutants. Their names? Jean Grey, and Hank McCoy. Forge and Charles set off to recruit both Jean and Hank, and hopefully get them to join in his idea to help teach mutants how to use their abilities for good.
Alright everybody, that's my latest installment of how to bring the X-Men to the MCU. What do you think? It was kind of cool? You didn't like it? There were parts you'd change? Let me know in the comments, and if you did enjoy it, give me a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe. We got music and other weird stuff coming up all the time, so please keep it locked here on Black Genesis. We'll see you soon.